Hello and welcome back to the Mixing Music Podcast. I'm your host Dee Kei, and with me as always is Language Lu.
Konnichiwa. I was like, wait, fuck. I can say hi in Spanish, but that's atypical Lu. Ciao.
Wait, hold on. A space typical Lu. Not atypical Lu. A space typical. Yeah. The typical Lu. Anyway, we have a great episode for y'all today. And these nicknames are getting so lazy. I need to start thinking about them before we say them. It's all right, whatever. This episode, we're going to talk about, I mean, you've read the title already, commercial music versus mixing for commercial records versus mixing creatively, right? And there's a little bit of a difference. Now, we all understand that mixing is very subjective, and there's records that we love, there's records that we hate, there's going to be people that find the opposite, right? People that love the record that you hate, people that hate the record that you love, just based on tonality and sounds. There's a few things that are objective. For example, tones do create a sense of nostalgia. For example, how the low end and top end and mid range sounds in a song can create the vibe of a retro track. Like,
you can also say that it would give you a different type of emotion too, like a more snarly kind of distorted kind of thing versus just a lightly distorted thing. Yeah.
So there's a lot of aspects of mixing that are objective, but the thing that is the most subjective is how a general population likes it, right? And sometimes we've heard crazy amazing mixes on songs that didn't need it, and we've heard some really bad mixing on songs that needed a good mix.
Yeah.
And Lou and I work in commercial music, meaning that we work on contemporary pop, R&B, hip hop records, right? We'll just say pop for the ease there, because I do some country songs here and there. We do some rock songs here and there, but we're just gonna say pop, right? And we also understand that mixing is super subjective, but when it comes to contemporary pop records for labels and radios, most of the time there's less flexibility in a mix.
Yeah.
Meaning that every single pop record should sound at least comparable to the previous pop record. Yeah. Whereas, for example, like Sufjan Stevens, like I think the famous story goes, he recorded it into an 8-track recorder, and then he took the 32 or 36-bit sample, or sorry, 38 kilohertz sample headphone aux out and recorded each of those 8 tracks into Pro Tools. So it's like really low sample rate, distorted, and that was what made something like that, something crazy like that, and that's what made Sufjan Stevens blow up as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about creative mixing versus commercial mixing, and why people, these labels, still pay so much money for these high-end mixers, and then also why you shouldn't care as much.
You know, I'm not going to lie.
We're going to fight both.
I know this is going to be a side tangent note, but that kind of gave me an idea to just try summing through like old school recorders and see what the summed down signal through a low quality thing would be. Because listening to artists like Sam Smith and everything, and how they have like kind of like lower, I guess, resolution sounding mixes on some instruments and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It sounds really cool. But now that you kind of mentioned that out loud, I'm like, you know what? Kind of want to try that. That'd be a great idea for a creative mix.
You know what? It might be. Totally might be. That's actually a pretty common thing to try. Anyway, let's get into this topic. Lou, I want to ask you.
Sure.
What are your thoughts just on the premise? We'll start with basics and kind of get more specific along as the show goes on. What are your basic thoughts of creative versus commercial mixing? And what are some of the first thoughts that came into your mind when we brought up this topic?
Well, you know, I use the song Till Now by Banks as like my monitor reference song. I don't think it's necessarily a commercial mix, but it's one of the best mixes in my opinion that I've heard in a while. And not because of any like, oh my God, this song's a bop or anything, but because of the detail that you hear. But
no, it's fairly commercial.
No, it's fairly commercial. But the other day I was with, who was it? We were testing out some monitors, and they instantly turned it down at the end of the song where the drums are completely distorted and everything. We didn't have the speakers loud or anything, but they thought I was blowing the speakers. I'm like, no, that's the mix. That's the mix. Like you were scared of the mix at a certain point, but like it's such a good mix on it, but it's such a creative mix. Banks overall has very commercial mixes through her songs, but when I think of creative versus like commercial mixes, I'm thinking more like this is not something I'd hear on the radio and then be like, oh yeah, this is the hot new single. This is the song everybody should be listening to. Because they usually want something almost like well delivered, well packaged. It sounds great. It's polished sounds. You know, it can stand next to like an Ariana Grande song or to a Childish Gambino song, and like the mixes can be close to each other. But like Childish Gambino also has very creative mixes. But when you really listen to them, you're like, yo, that's a very commercial bass tone. That's a very commercial snare tone. That's a very commercial kick hit. You know, there's like elements to something that makes it a little more commercial versus creative.
Actually, this is a great, I don't mean to cut you off, but this is actually a really great point. There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of commercial mixes that do well, that sound like, I'm trying to describe what a commercial mix is versus like a creative mix and the differences. But there's the fact is there's a lot of like crossover. Spears.
Like they're very clean and standard sounding records. With
Bruno
a very
Mars,
similar mix.
Even if it's like modern retro, but the fact that it feels modern is the commercial part of it. Yeah. Like Silk Sonic still has it's modern retro. Like it's very old and vintage. There's signs of it, but it's still at the end of the day really commercial. It's interesting. I think like a great example of like a non-commercial, like a very creative commercial mix is like Billie Eilish. Right? It's just like or like Triple X.
Yeah.
You know,
or even Bryson Tiller's Trap Soul album.
Yeah, so there's a lot of crossover there.
Yeah.
So but I do think there is a difference, whereas like Sufjan Stevens records do not sound like it cost $1 million to make.
Yeah.
But if you listen to any Ariana Grande song, she could have recorded it at home, but they all sound like they sound expensive.
Yeah.
The Silk Sonic, it sounds expensive.
Yeah.
Even though it's like modern vintage, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what it is. And from my personal research, I don't have the numbers that labels have, but when I've worked with enough artists on a regular basis that I know that a lot of times, especially when an artist comes from non-professional mixes to mixing with a professional like myself, it does most of the time affect their numbers. Like it's, I have a very good my instinct says that it actually does affect their numbers. I've seen this actually back to back in a few cases. But there's also a lot of other variables that was in place. So it's not like an isolated double blind test, you know, but
it might be that they also have a little more reach and they're pushing more towards it so they can afford to get more professional mixes now.
Yeah, so there's a lot more variables involved. But that being said, these labels wouldn't be paying this much for these super high-end mixers
if it wasn't something that they were doing that got them to where they're hitting certain targets.
And it may be things like those higher end mixers are just the most reliable in the industry. Like they have a lot, like they're on a schedule that the label's aware about. They're consistent. They know they're going to do good work. They don't have to question it.
Yeah.
It may be more about
just get it done, get it back to us. If the artist is okay with it and everybody's okay with it, we're okay with it. Because I'll be honest, I've met A&Rs who they're like, oh yeah, we just released the album. How's it sound? It's like, I mean, it sounds good. We send it to so-and-so for mixing, so you know it's going to sound good. It's like, have you listened to it? It's like, I listened to a couple tracks on it. You know, they sounded fine. It was like, you didn't verify the rest? Okay. Yeah. I mean, shit, that's trust in your engineer. That's a really good sign for that engineer. But that also means that, like, at a certain point in your career, you start knowing what it is that people are looking for, you know? And that's the difference between creative and commercial to me. When you know that there's an uncommunicated target, right? You might be saying to yourself, okay, well, what are these targets? Like I make, let's say, synth pop. Okay, cool. Well, find another synth pop artist that does really well and then find the next top 5 in relation to them and see if you can find out things that are very common in their mixes. Like, do their kicks always land in a similar pocket, like loudness wise? Like, is it always 3 dBs above the bass? Or like in certain genres, like in rock, a lot of times you can hear the snare louder than the kick by a long shot. In other genres, you hear the kick louder than the snare, depending on the group, right? But in some genres, there just isn't a kick. You know, depending on what you're doing, depends if it's something creative or commercial. You might be looking at a situation where you're like, okay, you know what? what was the group Mumford and Sons?
Mm-hmm.
That style of like, we'll say it's like folk music, right? I'm not gonna lie.
The older, no, well,
it's a modern mix though.
Yeah.
It's a modern mix though. Like when you listen to it, you're like, wow, that kick sounds like it's got definition. It sounds like they actually like room mic'd it and everything. That sounds very commercial to me. But a lot of folk music isn't very commercial in their mixes. So would that be the opposite? Would being going the commercial way be going the creative way? You know what I mean? It stands against the grain, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And then I'm also thinking like songs like anything from John Mayer where it's like very different from like a Dua Lipa tonally.
Yeah.
But it still sounds really well done.
Yeah.
Really warm. It's like the opposite tonally, but it still like feels like $1 million mix. So but yeah, that's more of like blending. It's not so much like tonal balance in that sense. That's
notice anything about John Mayer's mixes, how like his level of clarity is different from one song to another. Like his vocal tone may be a little more nasally in another, but it actually still fits. Yeah. I think though his mixes are commercial, there's still that crossover like we talked about where you can still find issues in the mix, but that actually help the mix. I think those are the creative differences in those mixes. But commercially speaking, they always have like that punch. The guitar always has like this perfect pocket next to the vocal because aside from being a good vocalist, his main thing is being a guitarist. Yeah. He's an instrumentalist that can sing really well. Like what's that song? I Still Feel Like Your Man.
Yeah, still feel like a man.
Yeah, that song is a great example of like a John Mayer mix that's like halfway between commercial and creative because like it's a little bit dull, but it's also very clear. Like it's like nowadays, if you listen to like let's say Teasy or Baines' mixes, they're very like top endy, but not very bright. Like finding ways to push upper mids and top end versus like the really high highs, and you starting to see like the trend of shrillness go away. But at a certain point, people were releasing mixes like that, and people were like, "Oh, there's not enough highs." Was that a commercial trend difference, or was that a creative difference?
Yeah. So we asked ChatGPT before starting this podcast episode about like what are some current trends.
Let's see what AI
all
thinks.
All of them are pretty meh answers, except for one, which is there has been an emphasis in clarity for like the last decade specifically.
You're seeing low end go down.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of like last 10 years ago there's like a lot of low end and a lot of top end but no mid range.
Yep.
This slowly we're starting to see less and less low end, more for like upper mid, like for mid range and top end. But I mean even like modern Chris Brown records, it's just so bright.
Yeah.
You know, Tory Lanez is freaking bright.
It's piercing.
Yeah, and then but those are like specifically like R&B hip hop tracks because I'm still thinking of like Charlie Puth, where like Charlie Puth records are still kind of like
sibilant.
One of them, a couple of them are, but they're more still like within the realms of like normal. They're not like super low end heavy. They're not super top end heavy.
Like the
funny
thing
bright.
is, like,
an Ariana Grande song is very bright right now. They're very super bright. I'm kind of going on that R&B hip hop thing, which is interesting because that's more based off of like that's more conversation about how influential the genres of hip hop and R&B are at this current time.
Yeah. Like it's kind of funny because you're seeing a return of rock and all that kind of stuff for the last couple of years. So much so that there's like some big rock festivals that are going on, like that everybody's starting to hear about. You know what I mean? There's being put a lot of money behind it. But those mixes traditionally always had kind of like, kicks down, bass up kind of vibe. You're starting to see the transition where like that hip hop kick that smacks through the speaker is being put into mixes for rock. You're starting to see like trap production drum samples and everything being sampled underneath an actual live kit and everything. You're starting to see like, okay, cool. Hip hop and R&B really do kind of influence what's going on, so much so that you know that song oh man, Better Than I Was, or I forget. It's the big Billie Eilish rock ballad.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but everybody's covering it.
There's something about Better Than I Was or something like that.
Yeah.
Something about being better.
Yeah. Like tried to
happier
than ever. There you go. But the funny thing is, like, I've heard 10 different covers of it, each one in a different genre style, and yet all of them have a very different mix, very different approach to the vocalization of it, and these are the creative differences. But the ones that actually did numbers wise on Spotify and everything better all had a very commercial mix to them, no matter what genre it was. But commercial just kind of comes back to that clarity. Like, creative differences could be like, I just want the vocal a little bit darker and muffly. I just like it. It sounds cool. But the label might hear that and be like, that sounds unprofessional. I'm sorry, but this is not the mix we're going to use. We're going to hire a different mixer.
Yeah, I think when I'm thinking about this out loud, because this episode we're both trying to come to a conclusion of what it means, because there's an obvious difference. I think one is, let me kind of reframe our conversation that we've had so far. One, we both understand that there is a difference between creative mixing and commercial mixing. Yep. There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of ways to be creative in a commercial mix, but there's obviously mixes that are just not commercial, but it doesn't mean it does bad. Yeah. It's just not commercial.
Yeah.
Right? So there's that's the one thing that we can take care of. I think another thing that we can talk about, another thing that we can dive into, is the idea that commercial mixes, the difference between commercial mixes, whether they have any sense of creativity in them or not, it feels intentional. Yeah. Like, it totally feels like it was done on purpose. And how can you tell, excuse me, how can you tell that a record that may sound distorted or may sound slightly bad, how can you tell that it was done on purpose? Like, it's a feeling that genuinely comes from control, preciseness.
Yep. One of the quick ways to tell is static effects. For instance, automation
like
is a very that's one of those things where it's a decisive change.
Yeah, like if you just throw a delay on and you leave it on the entire song, it's lazy and it feels cheap.
Yeah, but then you hear some songs where you're like, it kind of is the vibe of the record though. Like, the artist sang into it with that emotion in mind, with those effects in mind, staying there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another thing, the topic that we were talking about is I want to talk a little bit about is that I think the difference between a commercial mix and a creative non-commercial mix is intention. Like, those, no, that doesn't make sense either, because I'm thinking about like the Sufjan Stevens ones, it intentionally sounds so bad, but that's also why it makes it sound so right.
Exactly. But see, like, okay, like an accidental thing might be like, oh, the vocal distorted really badly right there, but it's kind of a vibe. Leave it alone. Like, the decision to leave it alone and to keep that distortion there, sure, that's a decisive one, but it's still a creative difference.
I think it comes down to balance, because I'm thinking like there's songs that are darker, warmer, like John Mayer. There's songs that are really bright, like Ariana Grande. There's songs that are super transient. Yeah. And then there's songs that are very smashed, and they're all playing on the radio. The one thing that doesn't work very well is a lack of balance. Yeah. Like, even if you have super distorted, very bad recordings like Sufjan Stevens, or like very dark ones with John Mayer, they're very bright ones with Tory Lanez, the one thing that they all have in common is very good balance. Yeah. And sometimes, like, the kick drums are louder and the snares are quieter and the background vocals are less loud. I think it's less what it actually is, but rather what does the song want? And it feels like they're listening to the intention of the song. Like, what does the song want to do? I don't know. Like, when I listen again, we come back to this idea at the end all the time. It's like a great mix. If you have a great mix, nobody's thinking about the mix. Yeah. Like, nobody says, "Oh my gosh, what a great mix." Yeah. No, they're thinking like, "Oh my gosh, what a great song," and they actually give the artist a chance. Yep. Like, if every time I listen to a song, like, I do a good job. I don't mean to pat myself on the back here, but I do a good job being able to listen to music for fun. Like, I don't overanalyze. Yeah. The only time that overanalyzing brain turns on is when I hear a bad mix. Yeah. I'm like, oh, now I can't. Oh, and I'm noticing that this is something that even my wife does now. So is that a bad
mix or a creative mix at that point?
It's bad. I think it's bad because I think
would balance still exist in a creative mix?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Like, some songs have more of this, less of this. Some songs have like a lead that's way too loud. Yeah. But it feels right. Yeah. I think that's what it comes down to. It's like a feeling thing. And I think this is the reason why we can even get into why, like, I don't think AI is ever going to get mixing done right. No. One, because there's not enough capital in mixing, so these companies that could invest the technology into doing it, it's not really worth it, so it's going to be a slow grind. Yeah. It's not the biggest expense in the industry to pay for a mixer. But also, I'm thinking, yeah, like AI is really good at computing math, but what have I heard? The Chris Graham says the hair on your arms stand up when you're what is it called? Not
when you get chills.
When you get chills, not goose pimples. What is it called?
Goosebumps.
Goosebumps. When you get goosebumps.
Goose pimples.
Yeah, there you go.
Pimples from a goose.
Those goosebumps is not mathematically achieved, right?
Yeah.
And just like we're trying to, like, if what gets put into AI, if you have to input something to get something out, like we're having a hard time describing what to input.
Well, you know what AI is never really going to do?
What's that?
Come up with an original thought based on just nothing. The funny thing is that AI is completely programmed and based off of information that's available. But if you wanted to go outside the box, you can't go based off of information that's available.
Exactly. So like we can't even describe what makes a fantastic mix. So like I don't even know what we would input
Sometimes
into an
you
AI.
just hear it and you're like, you know what? That's really cool. Hold on, let me move in this direction. AI might just be like, that's clear. Move on.
Yeah. That's so.
Think about it.
So
what
difficult.
could you tell AI to give you tasteful distortion in a way that makes you feel angrier? Can AI decipher what type of distortion would make you feel angrier if it's a personal emotion?
Dude, I still think like glue is probably, as far as what I can tell, like glue, and I hate that word, by the way, but it's I think like the distance between the tracks, like because like a really not poorly done, but locally done, like mix, like the drums just don't feel like they're squishing together enough. It's not like a lack of compression, but it just like it feels non-professional.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm a big fan of very transient drums. I think it's just because I came from playing in bands.
No, but I mean, like, I think it's like the hamburger thing where you like you have the hamburger and you mix it and then you squish it down at the. I don't know. There's something about it where the
when
distance
you see the
between,
ketchup just ooze out the side.
Yeah, because every song that I like so much
is a little bit squished.
Not squished, but like really, and not compressed in the audio sense. No. It's very condensed.
Okay.
It's very condensed. It's not squished. It's not compressed. I'm not hearing necessarily compression or pumping or anything like that. But
the dynamic range is not that wide.
It's not huge. But then you can say like for any jazz and bluegrass record, it's the total opposite. For any sort of like classical sync placement record, it's the opposite. Oh man, but that's not like commercial either in the typical sense. We're talking like pop music. Jazz is not pop.
But think about it this way too, like things that weren't necessarily pop back then are pop now. Like think about System of a Down mixes. They were very clean when you think about records like Toxicity. But then when you think about songs like Sugar, where he's just completely filtered out and all that kind of stuff, they're just being weird. The guitar is just going pew, 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 pew. And then he just comes in, Sugar. Like everybody's like, who the hell are these guys? Why are they releasing these songs? Who's mixing it? And then you listen to the mix, you're like, yo, that drum set sounds like it's just in an open live room. The guitar sounds like it was close mic'd and like professionally done. The bass, where the fuck is the bass? You know, but they were such good creative mixes because they stood out so much that eventually people were like, yo, I want that System of a Down sound.
For sure.
You know, like everybody started saying, you know what? It's so out of place that it feels good.
That's true. There are things that feel so out of place. Like a bad mix is a perfectly balanced mix, right?
Yeah.
Like a good mix doesn't have perfect balance.
Like
anyway,
when Trap Soul came out, I thought, I'm not gonna lie, I thought the mixes were pretty bad. I still kind of think so. Like every time I hear like what is it, 805 Come Up or 508 Come Up, I forgot what the name of the record is, but it's so piercy. The snare smacks you so dead in the ear that you're just like, ow. But then, like, everybody was hitting me up for like a year saying, I want that Bryson Tiller sound. Yeah.
I'm going to kind of bring us back to the main idea. I think there's a couple questions that I want to ask, right? And I want to think about is one, how can a novice mixer learn to achieve a more contemporary commercial sound when we can't even define what a contemporary commercial sound is?
Easy. Listen to more music and start pinpointing the things you like about each record. Forget about being the most perfect listener. Just start thinking emotionally.
We're going to take a quick break to let you know that this episode has been brought to you by Tegler Audio, based out of Berlin. Tegler makes fantastic analog pieces of equipment, everything from compressors, both tube, VCA as well, from reverbs to recording channel strips to tube summing mixers, and to my favorite piece that I personally own and have and use is the Schwerkraft machine, which is digitally controlled compression, 11 different types of compressor. I mean, this thing is built to the brim with tubes and transformers. It's fantastic. They have digitally controlled analog gear, which I'm a huge fan of. They've got 2 different pieces of that. They've got 500 series gear. So whether you're a tracking engineer, mixing engineer, or a mastering engineer, you need to check out this high quality company, Tegler. And guess what? Their prices, they're not crazy. They're mid-range prices for high-end equipment. They're like a fantastic company. We love them so much. And if you want 10% off any of their gear, you can go to their website directly or from their shop directly, or I'll link it in mixingmusicpodcast.com/Tegler, Tegler, and use the code MMPOD to get 10% off your next order. On top of that, till the end of May, they're doing like $30 or $40 off their new plugin that they're going to announce on June. So all of these pre-orders are going to be like a solid discount off, and it's a total secret. I have no idea what this plugin is. So once again, that code will not work on the plugin yet, but if you want gear, go check out mixingmusicpodcast.com/Tegler, Tegler, and use the code MMPOD. Now back to the show.
Think about it. Like, why do we like certain songs so much? It might be a vocal melody. Like, I like that song, Kiss Me More, because of SZA's lick at... But have you heard SZA's run at the end of her verse?
Like, not off the top of my head. I don't remember.
Yeah, exactly. But it's one of those, like, she arpeggiates down. Yeah, sure. But she does it in that like silky, soft voice that she has. But Doja's mix on that song is very clean, but SZA's consistent lo-fi, over-reverbed kind of sound just makes it to where like when she's doing things like that. That's part of her brand too.
Yeah. Like Travis Scott has a similar thing.
Exactly. You're just kind of listening to it and you're like, yo, I really like this. And part of it is not necessarily like knowing what EQ it is. It's just knowing what the vibe of the sound is. Yeah. You could use 20 different EQs and achieve the same sound.
Yeah, so I think you're right. You're exactly right. Like the difference between like a commercial mix and if you're a novice mixer trying to get more commercial mixes, you're exactly right. I think it's intentional taste. Like You're very confident with your own taste. You pick and choose what you liked out of when you grew up. You were listening to MGMT records that you really love. You had these John Mayer records that you really loved, and you had these Earth, Wind & Fire records that you really loved. You had these Stevie records that you really loved the sound of. You had these Chris Brown records that you really loved the sound of.
Yep.
And then you're combining it all to the point where you're mixing a song that is in your taste, that aligns with the intention of the song and what the song is asking for, what the
artist
client
is
wants.
looking to do.
Yeah, and then on top of that, your very well refined and defined taste, meaning that you know exactly what you want, and I can hear that.
You've learned to actually be able to pull up that sound on your own with your tools and get as close as possible. Because at the end of the day, nobody's going to get it exactly the same, not even the same mixer. You think every Chris Brown mix has the same exact vocal mix?
Yeah. Hold on, can I finish my thought before I forget? Yeah. Sorry. Is another thing too, is like a novice mixer, whenever I hear a novice mix, it doesn't sound like anything I've heard before.
Yeah.
It sounds really sloppy, and it doesn't sound intentional, and it sounds like they didn't reference anything.
Yeah.
And if they did, they were listening for the wrong things.
That's actually a really good point, referencing alone.
Yeah. It's like, so it's like, I think that's what it is. A bad mix doesn't sound like anything, and it sounds like you haven't really fully defined your taste, and it's not done intentionally. It sounds like you're trying to figure out what the song wants to do. And I think that's why practice and experience is so perfect, is because that's practicing you to not hear compression, although that's part of it, but it's helping you figure out what tastes work well with you. What type of compression do you like? And there's a lot of people out there that have put in enough hours to like hear compression, but not putting enough hours to forget what the compression does, and now to just listen to what it feels like. Because it takes a certain amount of like getting used to compression or getting used to EQ to figure out, okay, what about it is it that I like?
Yep.
You know, and I think,
for instance, I think you're more of a VCA guy when it comes to your buses. I'm more of a Very Mu guy, and it's just a taste difference. They compress.
Well, I'm pretty flexible. in this sense, yeah.
Well, it's always going to come down to preferences. You'll always.
But I have
change
my habits.
need.
Yeah, I have my habits. There's a few plugins that I always try first.
Yeah, like I'll always kind of reach for the El Rey, not because it's that much better of a plugin or compressor than anything else. It's just a sound that I'm familiar with and I can work with.
Tangent. Audioscapes is making a replica of the RCA compressor that the El Rey is based off of. Did you know that?
Ooh.
In fully analog
Can
form.
everybody
And it's
stop
like a
releasing
6U.
things?
It's like a 767U thing. Anyway, total tangent. We're not going to get into it. But yeah, no, I think that's exactly right what you were saying.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the powerful thing of it. A lot of new guys, when you listen to their mix, it's not necessarily that it doesn't sound like something you never heard before. You understand the direction that they were going. You understand somewhat of their inspiration. You can hear it to a novice
mix?
Yeah, to a certain level. Think about it. Everybody wants that super bright, super reverbed out thing, but things that you did notice in their mix is that it's not very clear. It's too much most of the times. It's usually too much top end. Usually it's too boomy in the voice. Like they didn't do any shelving to tighten up the voice so that it could be on top of the mix without sounding boomy or something. There's usually tells because they didn't reference another song and say like, oh, well, my voice is louder, so I want more bass in my voice. It's like, well, that's not actually how most people get it louder. Like you probably haven't referenced enough or while you were tracking it, you were probably so in your pocket for your own creative taste that if you were to try to make it sound more commercial, you probably should have listened to other mixes and been like, you know what? I know I like my voice this way, but let me see if I can find a way that kind of blends a commercial mix with my current mix.
Yeah. And going back to the commercial mix thing too, like there's like the sonics of it. We were talking about this,
like
the tonal balance of it. Some
end.
things are like too dark. Some things are really bright. It's also within that sort of stuff. Anything that's dark doesn't have like a really bubbly 500 hertz that's like really present and loud. Like it's still balanced.
Yeah,
it's still very balanced. Like that 500 hertz has been cut down or boosted to the point where it blends in everything really well with that. Yeah. And that again kind of adds to the intentional bit of it.
Yeah.
So the second question that I wanted to ask, if I can remember here. So the first one was, how can a novice kind of get to the point where it sounds more professional? I think the second question that I may have forgotten, I'm trying to remember right now, was going to be based around the idea of where can you and any listener right now figure out ways to, like, what are some ways that you find songs to reference, Lou? How do you study mixing? Like, how do you practice mixing without actually mixing?
So this is going to sound stupid, but when I'm not in the studio, I'm actively disengaging any kind of studio mindset. And I think that's what people need to do. I think people are being overly critical when they just listen to music, and because of that, it takes away from the fun of it. I think I talked about this on an episode last year where I went to a concert, and for the first time in a long time, I was able to enjoy the concert. Because I was more focused on the band than I was on the mix or the speakers in the room or how the room was calibrated. I just turned off that critical side of me and just said, you know what, just enjoy the record for the record and see what you like, you know? So like yesterday and the day before, actually for the last 3 days, I've been building out like over 50 acoustic panels, right?
Nice.
Yeah, a lot of work, not a lot of time to do it. But in that timeline, I probably listened to 1,000 songs, and at no point
hold
was
on. 3 minutes times 1,000.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Yeah,
what?
it doesn't
Siri,
work.
come on, hold
Hold
on. Calculator is quick. Hold on. Calc.
3 minutes times 1,000.
That's 3,000. Okay, let's divide that down by what? 60. 50 hours.
50 hours.
Okay, so maybe not 50 hours, but you get the idea. Okay, 500
almost 1,000.
songs. Yeah. I put in 3 8-hour days in just straight up like building, but still like 500 songs, we'll say. But I did the music that I like. I tried the Discover New Music playlist, and I tried a bunch of different things, trying to figure out like, I'm tired of listening to the songs that I've listened to a million times. And I started like hearing like new artists, new records that I'd never heard before. And I was like, yo, I really like this record. And like you said, like I wasn't really listening to the mix, which makes it a good mix. But there was a lot of things that I heard and I'm like, yo, I want to try that. Like, oh shit, did you hear how they use that delay? Did you hear how they use this and that? Like, because I'm in my AirPods and I'm in silent mode to try to like drown out whatever machine noise, like I'm just like creatively working, and just like sometimes you get sucked in by the song. Like if you want to get better at mixing, you need to know your tools. It's a poor workman that blames his tools. So you can't say, oh, this compressor sucks. No, you suck. But chances are the reason the compressor sucks is probably because you're not doing it with intention. You probably don't have an end goal in sight. And if you listen to more music creatively and as just a fan, you probably would find new end goals. And the more you find new end goals to reach, you would not only try to hit that, and once you hit that, find a new end goal, which means you're progressively getting better and better and better for learning these new little micro changes, right? You might say like, man, I really like the way they glue the drums together on this mix. You might go back to your studio later that night and be like, yo, I'm gonna try this. I'm just going to spend the next 30 minutes on this mix, trying out this compressor trick that I heard. Like, you might not know it was compression, but you might just be trying to recreate what you heard in these new songs.
Yeah, that's true. So what you're saying is kind of getting your taste, realigning your taste and figuring out what your taste is by just listening to music for fun again.
Yeah.
And I do think that that's actually really, really important.
Yeah.
Kind of getting out of your own head, stop over analyzing. I think that constant over analyzing of music is the sign of a noob.
Yeah.
Of a novice mixer. I think that you have to get out of your own head, because at the end of the day, like the number one advice from all of the interviews that we've done, from all of the Mix with the Masters, engineers, in person and online videos that we've ever watched, it's the number one advice of heavy hitting mixers is always mix emotionally. It's never anything else. It's not about this plugin. It's not about how I use this parallel compression.
Usually they have gear, but they'll never talk about their gear. And it's not because they're trying to keep secrets or anything. It's just like, it's not the most critical part of their work. Yeah.
And to be fair, more importantly, it's right. It's not the most critical part of their work. And it's straight up just taste. Yeah. And what was the direction I was going into? What was the point I was trying to make? But I do think that people need to stop listening. And when you do listen critically, I think that the reason why people have a car mix or a car test, the reason why people do a car test is because they typically listen to more music in their car casually. Mm-hmm. So I think referencing is not just something that you do while you're mixing, but you're doing it before you mix. So you're listening to music before you start mixing. Yeah. So you're building your catalog of what you like.
Yeah.
Right. So if you've been in the car and you've been listening to a lot of CDs, a lot of records, a lot of Spotify, and then you do a mix and you go into your car, and the reason why you can tell that there's too much low end or there's too much top end is because you listen to so much fucking music in your car that you can tell when something is off from your regular baseline that you've created from listening to so much music in your car. So instead of listening to a lot of music in your car, one way that you can practice mixing without mixing is actually listening to music casually, and maybe with a little bit of an analytical brain, in your mixing position. So if you're mixing on headphones, use those headphones a lot. If you're mixing on speakers, sit in your mix position in front of the speakers from like in the same exact way that you're going to do it when you're mixing, and spend 10 to 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour getting used to your speakers, getting used to the sound of all these mixes that you know you like, and figuring out what your baseline is in that position.
I'm not going to lie. One of the things that I'm really considering doing is just buying a set, because I had my DT 770s for so long, but it turns out they broke now. I must have stepped on them because I found the jack was broken, and I'm like, fuck, okay, I'll fix this in the meantime. But I was thinking about it, I'm like, I wish I could just have like some like headphones that everybody has, like some Beats or something. The AirPod Maxes, I forgot existed. If you have AirPod Maxes, you could take those into your studio and you can connect them with an 1/8 inch.
Oh, the headphone ones?
Yeah. You can actually over-ear ones? Yeah. You can actually use those as a reference point. If that's what you listen to all the time and you find a way to connect them, you can actually use them with your session workflow. If you can't do it connected directly, you can also do audio movers. Send your phone a link. It may have a little bit of delay, but that kind of forces you to kind of think a little more critically on like how much you touch before you hear the difference. But
yeah. The point is that the point you're making is that you're listening to music, whatever that you're used to.
Yeah.
So like Nels did this. If you remember Nels from Utah, he decided I listen to music so much on my AirPods that I'm just going to mix on my AirPods.
Yeah.
And they're not like the most flat or even close to the most flat. They're not reference grade monitors or something like
what
that.
he knows.
But his mixes sounded great specifically because he knew what they sounded like.
Yep.
He had a very strong foundational baseline of what too much bass is, of what too little bass is, and kind of the flexibility between genres, the flexibility between songs that he likes, and he kind of knew what his taste was, which made his mixes sound fairly commercial, even as a non-mixer.
Yeah.
Like he's a producer that had fairly good mixes.
And I can already hear people thinking like, oh, well, why not invest in like good speakers or good headphones at that point, blah, blah. I actually had this conversation with like a really big producer the other day where he was asking me, he's like, my headphones broke, never had an issue with them, used Beats for years. In fact, I mixed all these blah, blah, blah records, like they're known records on Beats, but I saw the Odysseys at NAMM, and like I just can't justify spending like an extra $1,500 when my $300 headphones were enough, this and that. And the only point that I could make to him was this, like, listen, man, like we both agree, like work on what you know. The only real reason you might spend more is because you want to hear more detail than those things can ever present you with, which makes your workflow faster because you make more decisive decisions with that much more information available to you. But
you have to take the time to get used to it.
Yeah, exactly. Which means if you buy a new set of headphones that you don't know, it's going to take you longer to get to the same spot you were already at. So buy the headphones you have if you're comfortable with those and you think it's gonna, like, if you're in the middle of a mix, I wouldn't switch headphones, and that's because in his space he has like KRKs, but he has no acoustic treatment. He's like, yeah, my room sounds like shit, this and that. So even if he wanted to mix on speakers and claim that the speakers were more expensive and this and that they should be better, in his room it doesn't really help him. So like I find that like a lot of times, like when you think about like a novice mix versus a commercial mix versus a creative mix, a lot of times the novice mix is like easily identifiable faults in the mix. Like the vocals are either too drowned out because in their room maybe there's like a bass note or something, so like they keep turning up the bass, but they didn't do the car test, they didn't check in their own headphones, but had they just used something that they knew, chances are they'd get a better balance in their mix.
Yeah. There's so again, I think referencing is the secret here.
Yeah.
And I do think it's very apparent and very clear when someone doesn't reference when they're mixing or before they're mixing. It's very apparent. And every time we do like mixed feedback or something like that, that's the first question that we ask. If it sounds really off from anything commercial, I'll be like, did you reference? The answer 9 out of 10 times is no. I have not. I didn't even think about it. I forgot to do it. I usually do it, but I didn't this time, along those lines.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that being said, I rarely ever mix during... No, I reference a lot during a mix, but I reference mostly with the rough mix, and if they sent specific mixes over. But I've been doing so much mixing and so much studying that like I have and in the same location with the same speakers enough now, where I have a very good foundational idea of what sounds great. Anyway, and I'm very intentional with my tastes. So one, referencing the importance of that, we cannot emphasize enough. It's making you look like a dumbass if you don't reference. Honestly, I'm telling you right now, it really, really makes it sound like you have no idea what you're doing. I don't know why it does that. I can't tell you technically why your mixes sound like shit, but it's very obvious when you don't reference. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons is because you don't really have a full idea of what your tastes are yet. But when you use a reference, you're going to find out, oh my gosh, my drums aren't even close to this. Yeah. And you're going to be able to hopefully figure out and kind of have at least when you experiment from then on, you'll have at least an end goal of what you're trying to achieve. Okay, I want the drums to sound more glued or whatever adjectives I'm using. To describe this reference drum kit. And then now you have no idea how to get there, but now it's actually becoming training where you're figuring out what tools are within your arsenal that are available to you to get to that sound that this reference says, okay, the cymbals are quieter, so I'm going to balance that down. Okay, but then there's the drum bus, it just feels like a little bit more aggressive, so I'm going to I'm going to try compression. I think that's the move. Okay, that wasn't it. Is it just boosted low end or dipped mids? Is that what it is? You try, it's like, oh my gosh, that was it. Oh, maybe now a little bit of saturation on top because the transients, you're going to start to think you have a reason and an end goal with your thought process. Mm-hmm. So it actually is even better training.
Yeah.
So it's fantastic. I think I did a lot of training like that, actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm sure you have as well, like with reference tracks, trying to match. You're never going to get it exactly right.
That was actually a test in my college where they'd give you a final mix and they just give you the raw stems. They're like, actually, that was one of our finals. Now that I think about it, but they basically gave you a fully mixed song. They gave you just the raw tracks, and they said you got 2 hours.
Yeah, there you go. And, and here's the thing: we've gotten to the point now where we did this before. Like the specific example is you had like a dangerous summing mixer.
Yeah.
And I said, I can do this with an EQ. Like the difference sonically that the summing mixer is doing, I can do with an EQ. I pulled up a fab filter, like did a cross reference, and just soloed the summed one versus the raw one with the fab filter, and I got really close to the sound of the summing box with just an EQ, and that's not something that anybody can do. That kind of goes to show that's the amount of training that I've done with references, and you could do the same thing too. You've probably done that before as well, where with an EQ and you're like able to match something because your training is based off of referencing. So when you have a sound that you want to go for, you know exactly how to do it. So there's a lot of that reference, and then as you reference, once you kind of know what you want to do, then add in the creative. And oftentimes, I will say, the higher level you go as a mixer, the creative moves, like something is distorting, was done by the producer. It's not done afterwards by the mixer.
Yeah.
So that's like a whole nother thing as well. Creativity is added in by the producer. The commercial is added by the mixer.
So something that I've added to my get a quote form has been asking the very defining difference of what they're hoping for me to do, which is, are you looking for me to take creative freedoms? And then I'll put in parentheses like possibly automating some delays and things of this nature, or adding a sub-vocal, sub-harmonic, or this and that? Or would you rather me take the mix from where it is and elevate, keeping everything in its place?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of times, like you said, sometimes the producer has done all the creative work and they're just looking for it to sound better. And sometimes, we might distort it as a mixing engineer because we thought it sounded cool and the artist agreed.
But not so much, well, it depends on the artist. But if it was like an A&R, you're sending it to an A&R, I'm not going to do something so different.
Yeah.
If it's like a friend that I'm mixing for, I might do something wildly different. But if it's for like an A&R, some sort of management or labor or something like that.
It's usually clean mixing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's anyway, that's just a thought. I think we're going to end the episode here. This episode has been brought to you by the Mixing Music Podcast.
Ooh.
We have exclusive episodes. mixingmusicpodcast.com/exclusive. The cool thing about these exclusive episodes is that we take interviews done by award-winning, Grammy-winning engineers and producers, and we break and when they break down their process, and then me and Braden, we expand on specifically how to do it. So there's like takeaway homeworks. There's lots of different things to take away. So if you're actually trying to improve your mixing skill from a technical basis, go to mixingmusicpodcast.com/exclusive to get access to the exclusive content. Now, the exclusive content is $4 a month or $40 a year, but it's totally worth it. We have a bunch of people signed up. And we're going to, maybe on the next episode, we'll do a shout out of everybody that's signed up. But the great thing is it's genuinely actually helpful from a technical perspective. We've done things about how to achieve better low end, how to get tighter low end, the top end, compression, what soft clipping versus hard clipping, things of this nature where you can actually figure out how to technically achieve and a better, more commercial sound. So go to, one more time, mixingmusicpodcast.com. We also have a bunch of free resources and a bunch of PDFs. So it's all fun and games, man. It's all, we have a bunch of free resources, including this podcast. And if you haven't already, check out Home Studio Heroes. Machi and Nautic are doing really, really well. And they're an official segment of the Mixing Music Podcast that are officially endorsed by us. So go check them out. And happy mixing, my friends, and stay saucy.